All right, so for this afternoon's keynote, I need you to just start clapping now, all right? This individual is a teacher by choice, one of the individuals who truly brings into this world the future. Every day, with the credentials of this man, he has chosen to share his light with the world from the platform and stage of a teacher. Dr. Nate Bowling, now in his 12th year of teaching, is a veteran of the United States Air Force Reserves and a graduate of Evergreen State College. He was a 2014 recipient of the Milken Family Foundation's National Educator Award, the 2016 Washington State Teacher of the Year, and was one of 4 finalists for the 2016 National Teacher of the Year. Nate was also a recipient of the 2016 Joseph Albert Deere Distinguished Alumni Award from Evergreen. This man's done a lot, y'all. Come on. He blogs about teaching, matters of justice, educational equality at natebowling.com. I'm going to say that one more time, at natebowling.com, right? And has been published on everything from the Washington Post to the New York Observer, Huffington Post, Seattle Times. Nathan is the co-founder of Teachers United, a teacher-led education policy advocacy group, and the host of the Nerd Farmer podcast. He teaches AP Human Geography and AP Government and Politics at Lincoln High School in his hometown. There you go. Clap it up for the teachers one time. And once again, a teacher by choice in his hometown of Tacoma, Washington. Ladies and gentlemen, we bring to the stage now Nate Bowling.
That's an intro, geez. All right. How are y'all today? I want to speak to you all from my heart about the issue of justice. And the thing is, today I'm going to say some things that some of y'all know. And so if I ain't saying nothing new to you, just understand what I'm really saying is, here's how you come at somebody else with it. Because in my profession and occupation, I talk to students all day, so I'm very used to taking very complicated ideas and making them very simple. And so that's what we're going to do today. And that slide's going to come up behind me in a moment, and it's going to show an image. I'm just going to wait 1 second. Not that one. It's all right. There should be a PowerPoint over there. I believe in y'all. We got this. I'm not worried. Hit escape. I believe in you. Okay, and then go down to PowerPoint at the bottom. There's another presentation there. Amen. Yep, the one on the far right. F5. There we go. And so what I want to do today is I want to talk to you all about the importance of taking a stand in polarizing times. We live in very, very interesting times. The old like Chinese proverb, it's a curse actually. May you live in interesting times. Well, folks, we got some interesting times. And the work that needs to be done doesn't fall to the people who want to do bad because they're already working. The work that needs to be done falls to people who want to do good because we have work to do. And so any talk that I give, I try to open with, yes, this image. My father was born in Laurel, Mississippi in 1930. He's no longer with us. My mother was born in El Dorado, Arkansas in 1940. She's still very much with us. And whenever I look back at images of the civil rights movement, I don't center myself on the black people in the image. I focus on the other folks in the image. And every talk that I give, I start with an image like this because there's a couple of things I really want to drive home to you before we move any further. Thing one, none of this is that long ago. Like we have this like lie that we tell ourselves that, oh, that's the old past and that's the old history and that's the old and that's the old that and that's the old. But I was at a talk in Philadelphia a couple months ago and Roland Martin laid it out that essentially black Americans have had full protections under the law since about 1968. So put differently, black Americans have been full citizens for 50 years. This nation is 230-something years old. The colonization of this nation started in the 1600s. And so our nation is colonized in the 1600s. Black folks have been free for 50 years. It's with that context, we need to have difficult conversations about the work that needs to be done and the opportunities to lead and the advantages that some folks have and disadvantages that other folks have. And so I'm just gonna ask you to just embrace that idea that essentially in America, nationwide, black folks have been free for 50 years. In addition to that fact, what I'll add to as well is that as a teacher, it's my job to teach content. I want my students to become endowed with a love of learning and understanding of important events and history. I want my students to sit down and be able to read a newspaper, whatever that is nowadays, to listen to a podcast, read an article, read Atlantic Magazine, read the New Republic, write their own articles. It's my job to teach content and skills. The other skill, though, that I feel like I have an obligation to teach is empathy. Y'all say the word empathy. Oh, no. Y'all gonna say that word. Say the word empathy. Thank you. And so when I say the word empathy, and you live the word empathy, like this image to me shows a lack of empathy. If I'm a classroom teacher, and I don't care what the hell my political beliefs are, and I turn on the television and I see my student scowling, snarling at screaming at people who were just trying to be free and get basic human dignity, I've failed. And these images are powerful to us and important to us, and this is why, like, for these images, like, I want to bring them before our eyes. Put differently, I want you to think about the way you live your life, the advocacy you do, the fights you pick, the fights you don't pick, the fights you avoid, and think about how you want to be captured in an image. Do you want to be the brave person walking ahead with dignity? Do you want to be the snarling, pessimist enemy in the background, or do you want to be indifferent? There are heroes among us, and there are heroes in this image. And again, this ain't that long ago, y'all. Linda Brown, hero, patriot, passed away last month. My mother's age. This ain't that long ago. So I'm a teacher, and so I like to think about the idea I'm a teacher who speaks, not a speaker that teaches. And so in my classroom, I always have an essential question. That's the question we're trying to get our head around, the problem we're trying to solve, our problem of practice, our goal, our mission, our vision. So here's my essential question for you all. I would love somebody with a nice booming voice, use that giant voice privilege to just read that essential question, please. It doesn't matter who.
How can we collectively promote meaningful and inclusive solutions to the issues impacting the most socially, culturally, and economically marginalized members of the community?
Thank you, my brother. Can we do this, please? This is gonna be a teacher move. I'm gonna ask you to turn and talk at your tables. And what I'm gonna ask you to do is talk about what does that say in your own words, and why is that our question for today? And then when I wanna get your attention again, then we're gonna do thank you. And here's how thank you works. I'll say thank you, thank you, thank you. And that third thank you actually means be quiet right now. So, in your own words, what does that question say? And then secondarily, why is that our question right now? Have a conversation, please.
Yeah, I know.
Getting at to finding solutions to problems. I consider you are we as a country right now find solutions to problems.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's two. I believe in y'all. We can do this thing. Thank you.
That's 3.
See? Isn't that dope? Like, my first year teaching, I was walking down the hallways, and the teachers were like, guys, just tell them thank you. And just teach them thank you and shut up. That's all right. So, could I get somebody with a booming voice, but preferably a non-male this time around, to what does that question say in your own words? Please.
We want to know who is not at the table that should be at the table.
We want to know who's not at the table, who should be at the table.
Was that not booming enough?
No, I'm just... All right, I just got called out for heat eating. I got you. Okay. Yeah. Next question, why is Nate heat eat? Can I get one more voice, please? What's that question saying?
How can we all help those who need it the most?
Did y'all hear that? No. Okay, so now I'm going to heat eat because it's okay. How can we all help those who need it the most? Ma'am in the magenta, you were sharing something that was really beautiful with the whole room, please.
So at our table, we discussed that we are more polarized now. And I took interest, I don't know that we're more polarized, it's more visible. That in fact, America, this has always been there, but it's, at least I was able to ignore it. I know some of the history, that things are getting better, but in fact, there's just this ugly underbelly of America that people feel either we're just more aware of it because of social media, or it's louder, or people who feel a certain way feel more like they can express it, but it's not worse or different. It's just we're seeing it more.
Amen. May I say really fast that nothing I'm going to say to you today is original thought. It's all just influence from the milieu that I find myself in 2018. And so the first thing I want to lay out there are my biases. I think it's important if I'm going to talk to you about what I believe, that I kind of put on the table who I am and what I believe. And so the first thing I want to put on the table is that privilege is real. And I think in this room there's an understanding about that, but privilege comes in many different facets. So a lot of times we like to talk about like, well, there's white privilege. And there's white privilege, for sure. But there's also male privilege. There's also privilege about ableism. There's also privilege about all sorts of things. Essentially, all privilege is an unearned benefit. And lots of us have lots of unearned benefits. If you were raised in a two-parent stable home with food on the table, that's an unearned benefit that many folks didn't have. So privilege exists. And one thing that I think is really important to talk about is the idea that privilege intersects. And so in my class yesterday, in government class, we were talking about intersectionality. And then they came in this morning, so I taught 1, 2, and 3 this morning before I got on the road. By the way, it's a Tacoma to Lynnwood, 50 minutes, woo me. Right? Miracle, on the way home, 4 hours, whatever. So I'm checking their notes on the door about the conversation, and I'm looking in their notes, and I'm like, intersexuality, what the hell did I do wrong here? And so I realized I had to go back and reteach. And so for you all, I'm sure a lot of you are aware of the idea of privilege and intersectionality, but let me say this really fast. I have privilege. I am a heterosexual, cisgendered, pretty handsome, straight, tall black male. And what happens is that our society pushes some identities toward the center and pushes some identities toward the margins. And as a straight, cisgendered, fairly handsome, Christian, tall black male, I thought you weren't kind of handsome, and I was like, we gonna squab here. So so I have privilege for that. I receive privileges. And I think a lot of folks get really defensive when you talk about the privilege they have if you don't acknowledge the privilege that you have. And so I just want to acknowledge my privilege. When I walk into the room, in many occasions, after being introduced like that, there's some benefit of the doubt that I get from the room. Now, that benefit of the doubt disappears sometimes. So quick story. I'm in Washington, D.C. I'm at an ed conference. I give a keynote, kind of like this, a much more ugly room than this. This room's beautiful. The next morning, I'm flying back home on Alaska Airlines Flight 4, my go-to flight, and I get on the elevator in my normal clothes, baseball cap, flannel cap, jeans. The lady that introduced me at the keynote the night before, purse clutches. And so I have some privileges, but my privileges are situational. We all have privileges, and it's important to be aware of our privileges and aware of the privileges we have in certain spaces where we take them. Okay. The other bias I want to talk to you all about today is I hear a lot of folks say things about, well, I don't want to be political, and I don't want to get political. This can't be political. We shouldn't politicize this. Man, let me tell you. There's political, which is whether you vote for a D or an R, and really, I don't care if you vote for D and R. I don't care. And there's seeking justice. So when I say to you that every student deserves a well-trained, effective, passionate educator, that's not a political statement. That's a matter of justice. Okay? When I say to you that no child should starve, no child should be hungry, cold, not have a place to sleep at night, that's not political. That's a matter of justice. I'm gonna lose some folks when I say that it is completely unacceptable that each year in America, over 1,100 people are killed by law enforcement. That's not political, that's justice. Now, I feel obligated to offer some serious caveats here. I have great esteem for the people in law enforcement. I think the work of policing is some of the most important work that happens in communities. I think it's an important, essential job, much like teaching. I have a brother who's worked for the Seattle Police Department for over 20 years. Like, I hold law enforcement in high regard, and frankly, this gets me in trouble with some of my friends. But that work is too important to be done by fools. And in situations, sometimes we see that there are folks who cannot handle the responsibility of having a life and death-taking weapon when they are in the presence of communities. And we watch videos and we see folks panicking and afraid. And what happens is that when they get panicked and afraid, their brain goes lizard brain to their biases. And like, that's the issue. That's the issue. And so I feel obligated to dig in this really fast. I am not anti-police. I am pro law enforcement. I want law enforcement to be as responsible as I want teachers to be. Okay. So, more of my biases. This is a map of my city, the city of Tacoma. But this map doesn't look like normal maps look. This is a map that divides my city, like all major metropolitan areas in the US were divided, basically along lines. Could somebody with a booming voice and good eyesight, please, in the first kind of row of the room, could they read through, what does the green color mean? Best. The best. Best. How about the blue color?
Still desirable.
Still desirable. How about the yellow color?
Definitely declining.
Definitely declining. How about the red color?
Hazardous.
Hazardous. This map was created by the federal government, bankers, and real estate agents as a means of dividing communities across the country. This is a form of de jure segregation that is no longer with us, but that reverberates with us till today. The housing patterns we have in every single major metropolitan area in the United States are uniformly segregated, and that is not by accident. That is an intentional design that happened in the past. Now, many of the folks who did that work are no longer with us, but the work they do reverberates in our times today. I often speak at real estate conferences, and I say to real estate agents, the work that you're doing is far too important to be worried about quarterly performance or annual performance. We're talking about multi-generational impacts. The policies and practices of education, law enforcement, and real estate provide multi-generational impacts on communities. We have to be aware of that work. We have to be aware of that history, legacy, and lineage. This is a redlining map. I was born in one of those hazardous areas. And I was born in that hazardous area because when my family arrived in Tacoma, Washington in 1960, they were not shown a house in the blue neighborhood, even though they were qualified credit-wise to have a house in the blue neighborhood. I have a friend named Abby. When her family arrived from Oklahoma in 1960, they were shown a house in the blue neighborhood. I ain't mad. But we can't just excuse that and say it didn't happen. I can also tell you that the exact same house on that map in a blue area and the exact same house on that map in a red area, there's about a $200,000 difference right now on the real estate market. And if you didn't know, because of Seattle, the real estate market in Tacoma is crazy, and I bet it is up here too. Now, I want you to think about that. I just throw a number out, $200,000. But think about what a family can do with $200,000 in unearned income over a series of generations? Shout out, please. What are some things that you could do, a family could do, with $200,000 they did nothing to earn over a series of generations? Send your kids to college. Shout some more out. Buy another home. Buy a car. Savings. Small businesses. I heard a bunch of things back there I agree with. I don't know what they were, though. I love y'all. Take vacations. Retire. Braces. That's a parent for sure. I'm like, what? So when we talk about wealth gaps and talk about income gaps, these things aren't magical. When we talk about the idea that like the median family income of black families and the net household worth of black families, Hispanic families, Latino families, single parent families is lower, that's not by accident. What neighborhoods do they live in? What do they have access to? What parks do they go to? What are the lead levels in their water? What industrial hazards do they live by? These are my biases. So again, my biases. Privilege is real. I am not a political person. I'm about justice, and the history that has happened in our society matters. I want to talk to you today about really 3 books that I think frame, I love my note takers, by the way, that just happened. 3 books that kind of frame my worldview and the way I see America and the world that we live in and what needs to happen. But before I talk about those books, I want to talk about something that I've written myself. So there was a mention in my introduction that I wrote an article that was in the Washington Post. I wrote an article called The Conversation I'm Tired of Not Having. Brief background. In my year as State Teacher of the Year, they gather all 57 of us, DC plus the territories, 50 states, for several gatherings. A lady named Kim Oliver, who teaches in Montgomery County, Maryland, Montgomery County, very affluent county, was talking about how she has been teaching in Montgomery County for over 20 years. She's the National Teacher of the Year 2009, Montgomery County, Maryland, affluent county, 20 years. Have those facts in your head. Kim Oliver, in 20 years, had never had a white student. How, in one of the most affluent counties in the United States, within a golf shot of the US Capitol, does one teacher work in the same district for 20 years and never have a white student? Segregation. And so, listening to her talk, and also talking to the other teachers of the year and noting how many of them were from like low-income schools or like 90% brown schools, like I flew home on Alaska Airlines angry. And so I published and wrote a little piece because I got on the plane and I'm like, I'm gonna tell these suckers what I think. And so what I think basically was 3 core truths. Truth 1, our kids, and when I say our kids, I don't have my own children, my students, our kids go to poorly funded schools that are more segregated and have less qualified, less experienced teachers. And that's by design. Essentially through white flight, suburbanization, private schools, home tutoring, what I call opportunity hoarding, many middle-class families have shielded themselves off from the rest of us. And essentially they've isolated themselves and insulated themselves from inequality. Okay. So essentially, we don't care about poor kids and many brown kids. And we don't care about poor brown kids. If we did, we wouldn't leave them in the places we leave them. Truth 2. There's no impetus to change this. The folks who have power take care of theirs. Through like local levy funding, succession districts, which is when a school district leaves a larger district, suburbanization, they take care of themselves. There's nobody coming to the rescue of these kids. Part 3, so the first 2, people were like, yeah, I'm here for that, I'm here for that. Part 3, not all teachers are created equal. And that teaching is not a mission, but a calling. And that we should take whatever policy measures we can to put our most effective educators in front of our neediest students. I hit publish on that. I get like between 2,000, 4,000 hits on a typical blog post. I wake up the next morning, I've got 3 voicemails from the Washington Post, I got a voicemail from the New York Times, and I'm like, what in the hell just happened? It blew up. And the response to it was almost uniformly positive. People had very positive things to say. Nate, that's very brave of you. You stick your head out there. That's yes, 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 yes. But I got one response to the piece that I want to share with you today because it came in the mail. And so when I read this to you, understand that like this isn't like some angry email. Like this sucker put this on wax. He sat down and dictated this to his legal aid, sealed the envelope, and then sent it to me at my school. And when it arrived, I was teaching, and I was like, oh, I gotta sit down for a second. There's no offensive language here, but there are some offensive ideas. I'm gonna ask you, if you hear something you don't like, don't boo me, I didn't write it to myself. This is from the law offices of Ralph W. Fusco, Esquire. February 2nd, 2016. R.E., your article, White People Are Happy with Segregation. That wasn't my article title, but I'll move on. Mr. Bowling, first, congratulations on being named the best teacher in Washington. I wasn't named that either, but that's another conversation too. I'm sure you're very skilled at what you do, and you deserve this recognition. But I disagree with you about white people being happy with segregation. You do not apparently see the same attitude when it comes to Asians. There is no white flight from Asians, and you need to ask why. You do not apparently see that same attitude. Blacks have a distinct reputation for not wanting to better themselves and to rely on white people for their upkeep. And this is a problem of the black community, not the white community. Here's an example. I was flying with a teacher from Syracuse a few years ago, and we started talking about his students. He had a mixed high school class, and he told me that one day he asked his class to write down what their aspirations were for the future. One black boy stood out in his memory. This boy said in his note that his aspiration was to reach 21 years old so he could receive his own welfare check in his own name. The teacher was astonished. But that's just an example of the entrenched cultural laziness and lack of ambition that blacks have. Blacks have the reputation for underachievement. Black boys discourage other black boys from studying because it isn't manly. Instead, they wear their pants below their waist to emulate black prisoners and spend the rest of the day disrupting students who want to study. And what do black parents do about that? Nothing, except blame their plight on white people. All right. There was a study of the difference between white students and black students in Washington, D.C. There is a gap between the two, and the study found it is increasing. The only reason why the high school in the study was not on the absolute bottom of achievement, the report said, was because of the presence of white students. Mr. Bowling, you need to understand the world from a white parent's perspective. There's no way that white parents want blacks around their children because their influence is totally negative. There are exceptions, of course, but the reputation of blacks is they are disruptive. They do not contribute. They are not intelligent. They bring the class down. Asians, on the other hand, study and excel. They do not present the threat that blacks do, and it doesn't matter what shape the school's in, they prosper nonetheless. It is not a matter of money, it's a matter of family. White people do not champion segregation. They just don't want blacks around their children for all these reasons. They just want to get away from them at any cost. You cannot blame whites for their hard work and achievement. You cannot blame whites for wanting their children exposed to an atmosphere which is conducive to study and hard work. The purpose for white parents placing their children in schools is not to make blacks more comfortable. It's to educate their children so they can achieve just like their parents have done. If you want to change what you consider to be segregation, then you need to stop blaming whites and start looking around at the root cause of the problem, blacks themselves, and the total breakdown of their families. Please stop blaming white people for all the failures of your own race. Sincerely, Ralph W. Fusco, Esquire. He put it on wax. And frankly, I'm glad he did. Here's the thing. That's trash. That's like hot, buttered garbage trash. But if you look at the condition of our schools and look at the conditions that we put low-income families in and people of color in, the societal arrangements we have are no different from what we would have if Ralph Fusco was in charge of our institutions. Let me say that differently. Where's the lie? Where's the lie? All right, so I'm petty. I'm hella petty. So I Google Ralph Fusco's behind immediately. And I'm like, let me look this. And do you know what the first return I get for Ralph Fusco is? Ralph Fusco, school board candidate. Yup. And so I'm actually glad that Fusco wrote this letter to me and put it on wax, because that is what our reality appears to me. How else then do I work at Lincoln High School, a school that is 80% brown, in a state of Washington, which is definitely not 80% brown? If that's not the reality, how do we explain mass incarceration? If that's not the reality, how do we explain disproportionate searches by police? If that's not the reality, how do we explain ICE? So, to me, there are 3 books that I think we all need to read to center ourselves on what is happening in our country. The first one's Evicted. And Evicted is basically about the war that we have waged against poor people, particularly women, particularly poor black women. Somehow over the last 40 years, while we were all enjoying our tax cuts and Reaganomics and deregulation, the real estate industry has basically leveraged every single advantage, particularly landlords, for themselves against renters. And basically every state has passed laws that make it easier to evict people instead of more difficult. And what we find when we look at the data is that women who are single parents are evicted at high rates, and black women are evicted at higher rates than white women are or women of any other group, even in the exact same situations. We also find that folks who do not have an attorney representing them lose almost all the time. And in fact, we find that if you have an attorney, your chances of winning your eviction suit basically go up by a factor of 10. This book is written by an author named Matthew Desmond. And what Desmond did is he embedded himself in Milwaukee. And he looked at the rental practices in the city of Milwaukee, which are no different than practices in many metropolitan areas. If you're somebody who doesn't like really wonky stat books, this is the book for you. Like, it's all narratives. It's him sitting down and telling the story of people who were evicted basically because they were one bad thing, one medical injury, one accident, one major illness, one away from instability and losing everything. And y'all, after reading this book, I really sat down and started to realize that, like, there but the grace of the man above or woman above or being above, there go I. A lot of folks in this room right now are one accident, one missed paycheck away from being in that boat. And so, like, this is the urban condition. I've commented a lot about, like, so I go to Sounders games, go to Husky football, about homelessness in the Seattle area. Okay, so homelessness in the Seattle area is caused by lack of affordable housing. If you look at what happens with housing affordability, oftentimes low-income residents, because they have low credit, actually have to pay more in rent for inferior housing. There's nothing just about that. Essentially, we have a silent war on poor families, particularly poor mothers, particularly poor black mothers. And Matthew Desmond's Evicted is the codex for that. Like, if you don't hear anything else I say today, read Evicted. Next. Okay, I got the head nods. I appreciate that. So we talked about Evicted representing a war on poor black women. Let's talk about a book that represents a war on poor black men. Y'all, I get frustrated with this so bad, man. So I teach government, and it's my job to tell students about what America is and then try to demonstrate to them the gaps between what we say and what we are. We are the land of the free, who incarcerate a higher percentage of our population than any other nation in the world. And it has not always been that way. There are some things that have happened in our lifetimes that are just drastic deviations from the mean. Like, this is a policy choice and a policy circumstance that we've allowed to happen during our lifetimes. Mass incarceration is a shame on all of us. We incarcerate more people than any other nation in the world. And what we do after somebody's incarcerated is a travesty as well. We basically guarantee they go back to prison. Do you know if you go to prison for a nonviolent drug offense, when you come out with a felony offense, you, in many states, cannot vote. You cannot get federal financial aid. So you cannot get financial aid for education. You have to check a box that says you committed a felony, which basically means employment is out the window, and you're not eligible for government housing assistance. Well, hello. I can't go to school. I can't get a job. I can't get help getting a home. Where am I going? Say it. Say it. You're going back to prison, and now a ton of those prisons are run by private corporations for profit. And so, like, the plague of mass incarceration is one of the greatest equity issues that we need to address in society today. But again, it's one of those issues where the marginalized populations have no political capital, so they aren't heard. You can't hold a protest. You don't write op-eds. You don't get on podcasts when you're incarcerated. And in fact, if you want to make a collect call, you have to go through the corporation and pay $25 to make a collect call. Like, this has happened in our lifetime. In environmentalism, there's an idea of like generational change, that like you don't notice the ice caps melting and you don't notice the declination of salmon runs because it's happened slowly over your time. But if your grandparents walked in and looked at that, they would say, where are the salmon and where's the ice? Like we have allowed in our lifetime, in some of the most, the word I want to use, I'll be careful here, in some of the most affluent times, with GDP growing, we've allowed basically this to happen to an underclass, a permanent underclass of our society. I think the reason why that's happened is actually my third book, The Big Sort. So The Big Sort is basically the story about how America is sorting itself ideologically, racially, economic, and along class lines. Essentially, there are no more spaces in which human beings or Americans at least, from different races and classes come together. We don't have fraternal organizations. Nobody goes to the Elks Lodge anymore. Nobody's a Mason anymore. Nobody goes to the bowling league anymore. We sit at home and binge watch Netflix. And when we binge watch Netflix, we watch Netflix based on an algorithm that's catered to us. And when we get on social media, we look at algorithms that are catered to us. And essentially what we have is a great sort. And so we have ideological areas, ideological neighborhoods, ideological counties that have a uniform, homogeneous ideology and worldview, and they view the other side as the other. Can I tell y'all what this leads to? What does this lead to? It leads to that. What we had in November of 2016 wasn't an election. It was essentially a tribal crowning ceremony where every demographic group in the United States, every single demographic group in the United States, save white Americans, selected a candidate for president who got 3 million more votes than the other person and lost. If I said that about anywhere else, that every ethnic group in Iraq except for one ethnic group had an election, that one ethnic group got 3 million fewer votes and lost, y'all would be like, But that's our reality that we have in the United States today. And hear me, I'm not even worried about Trump. This isn't anti-Trump. This is about us and the work we need to do. This is about our democracy. This is about like the sustainability of our society and cohesion. Y'all, as a class, and I'm gonna lose some of y'all here and I ain't mad. As a classroom teacher who has traveled extensively in Latin America, I do not wanna live in a stratified society of haves and have-nots. I do not wanna be the wealthy folks on Caracas looking down at the peasants. I do not wanna live in a walled compound in Mexico City with broken glass on the wall. I want to live in an integrated society. I want to live in a society where the destination where people are headed is not determined by where they were born, but their aptitude, ability, and what they do with their life, and that is something we are running away from at full speed. On Father's Day, last year, she became the 587th person killed by law enforcement. The total for the year became 1,106. There was an outrage for a minute on Twitter. Some folks were mad. There were some comments in an investigation. But really, we just returned right back to business as usual. This is a matter of justice, y'all. The idea that 1,100 people die at the hands of people who were sworn to protect us is a matter of equity. And I have to imagine if the victims of those killings were not disproportionately people of color, or disproportionately low-income people, our reactions would be different. Do y'all remember a little bit after when Philando Castile got killed, that Australian lady was killed by the police in Minneapolis? And there was a big outrage for about 15 minutes? We've just normalized this. So we've normalized evictions. We've normalized mass incarceration. We've normalized violence against citizens. We got work to do. I'm not trying to be a downer, but like, we got work to do. I'm hearkened about the work we need to do because the stakes are really high. Like, this isn't like some trivial, like, oh, you know, if we don't, this is a life and death matter to me. Like, honestly and truly, it's a life and death matter. This image you see here is one of the proudest moments of my life. In 2016, I went to the White House with the other teachers of the year, and I got to meet Barack Obama in his final year of the presidency. And what you see behind me is the Eisenhower Executive Building. And let me tell you, as a policy-wonk government teacher, going to the Eisenhower Executive Building and going to the West Wing of the White House and posing for corny photos in the briefing room, come on, fam. Like, point of pride, point of lifetime pride. If I may, though. This is the gala that we had. I call it teacher prom. And so, who you see with me is 2016 Oklahoma Teacher of the Year, 2016 Nebraska Teacher of the Year, 2016 California Teacher of the Year, and then 3 of our wives. Mine's the cute one on the right. That gala, that teacher prom was held in the Ronald Reagan Federal Building in Washington, D.C. And I'll never forget like walking into that building and seeing that just giant, beautiful space, the Ronald Reagan Federal Building. After the election, Richard Spencer and his alt-right, neo-fascist, neo-Nazi, insert whatever pejorative adjectives you want there, had their celebration at the same building. You have to understand like how this hit me. Essentially, one of the crowning achievements of my life happened in a room where months later, Nazis are spiking the electoral football, yelling anti-Jew, anti-black slogans. Come on, y'all. Like, this is the work. Here's the thing, is we understand what the stakes are, or hopefully by now you understand what the stakes are, but we need to really talk about what the stakes are with the fact that like they have a plan. They have an agenda, they have policy documents, they have their own little insulated media networks, they have bots, they have. In my government class, we talk about the Overton Window. The Overton Window is basically like the realm of politically possible in any given moment. And one of the things you'll notice is that change in America happens in like spurts. We have 27 constitutional amendments. 10 of them are in the Bill of Rights. That means the other 17 are over a 230-year period. 3 of them happened in one 5-year period after the Civil War. So after the Civil War, in a period of massive change during Reconstruction, we amend the Constitution 3 times. We emancipate blacks, 13th Amendment. We guarantee them equal protection due process, 14th Amendment. We give them the right to vote, 15th Amendment. And then the window slams shut. And essentially, we just regress on civil rights for 100 years. Plessy versus Ferguson codifies segregation. We regress for 100 years. The window opens again in the 60s. Okay? So in the 60s, we get the March on Washington. We get the I Have a Dream speech. We get the protests. From that, we get the Civil Rights Act, Fair Housing Act, Voting Rights Act. The window slams shut. On the other side, let's not talk about race. Let's talk about the environment. We had an amazingly terrible environmental record in the United States. In the 1970s, the window opens up. You get Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, creation of the EPA, Endangered Species Act. The window closes. I'm going to argue to you that the things that make the window open and close in American politics are periods of united government, where the presidency and both houses of Congress are of the same party, and which that same party enjoys large majorities in state legislatures. That's our moment. Put differently, we're posed right now for a New Deal. But not a New Deal, a New Deal, but that New Deal ain't no New Deal, it's an old rotten deal. That is where we are posed right now. And what I say to you is that we had a glimpse of what the plan is. And we had a glimpse, because here's the thing is, I'm telling you right now, as thoughtful, equity-minded people, the Overton window is open in our politics right now. I know this. You know this now. And they know it. Charlottesville for me was the line in the sand. Like, that is a moment when the forces of white supremacy, the forces of anti-Semitism, the anti-immigration zealots laid down their line and said, this is the future we want. They said it in their slogans. You will not replace us. Jews will not replace us. Blood and soil. White supremacists took over a major American college campus and occupied it for 2 days, including having the police outgunned, where the police were forced to retreat. They murdered a woman with a car and led to an accident that killed 2 state troopers. And we shrug. Like, some of you were personally upset, but what were the policy changes that we made? What were the policy responses? What did we change at all in any language, in any law, at the state, local, or national level? Nothing. Because there were many good people on both sides. This is the work ahead of us today. And so I don't have answers for you. I have challenges for you. What I would say to you is this. Each of you is an obligation. And I try to keep it really simple, because one of the things that I don't want to do is when audiences are like, well, Nate, what should I do? That's for you to decide. I don't know your life. I don't know your network. I don't know your level of courage or fortitude. I don't know how strong your ovaries are or testicles. So what I'm going to say to you right now is when you see incidents of racism, white supremacy, inequity, abuse, harassment, insert your own isms, I don't care. When you see those incidents, you have an obligation to do three things. One, affirm. Say the word affirm. No, y'all got to talk to me. Say affirm. You need to affirm the humanity of the victim. When you see attacks from racists, you see attacks from bigots, you see discrimination, you see harassment, you need to affirm the humanity of the victim. Are you okay? I'm sorry that's happening to you. What can I do? Next, you need to report. Whether that be call the police, whether that be report them to Twitter, whether that be step in the middle and talk to the transit officer, whatever. When you see intimidation, you see this happening, you see discrimination, whether it's on a bus or in a bank, you need to first affirm the humanity of the victimized, and then second, report the victimizer to the authorities. So if you're standing in line at the Safeway and the teller is being a jerk to a poor woman because she's trying to use her WIC tickets, you report her to her manager. And then the last one, your mileage may vary, depends on who you are, confront. When I first started doing this, I called it bicker. But I'm not sure bickering's productive, so I'll try this. Confront the abuser. That's the work. Like, that sounds like dangerous, but like if we're not willing to do that, what we're doing is we're surrendering to the forces who want to do ill to people in our society. Y'all, this is the challenge and the work ahead. I teach in a classroom. I have a podcast. It's called the Nerd Farmer Podcast. It's called the Nerd Farmer Podcast because I'm growing nerds. In the 1980s, when I was a skinny black kid walking around with a briefcase, that was not a good look. It's a good look now. Nerds are in style. I gave the Wakanda salute. That's comic books, man. Comic books in the 80s, y'all would have been like, what's that nerd doing comic books? Like, this is a moment right now that we live in. So my philosophy is nerd farming. I'm a teacher. The students who I work with will be the future law enforcement officers who are justice-minded, real estate agents who are justice-minded, small business owners, entrepreneurs, bankers, financiers, and neighbors. That's the work. You do not create that through passivity. You create that through intentional efforts. I say to you right now, we need to take an intentional effort to comfort those who are being victimized by the isms in our society. Say affirm. Say confront. I skipped one. Say report. Let's go back to the top, in fact. Say affirm. There we go. That's better. Say report. Say confront. Don't say it, live it. Thank you. Wakanda forever. I know we have some time issues here. I think I have about 10 minutes for questions, yes? So I would love for this to be a dialogue, but the dialogue on your end needs to be shorter than the part on my end, not because you're not valuable, but because time. And so, perfect. What we're gonna ask is, the first sentence that you say should be a question, and there shouldn't be a second sentence. All right, so are there questions? Oh, I like that. Oh, never mind, over there. Oh.
All right, real quick. So you mentioned confront. What does that look like?
It really varies, right? Like, it depends. And so I have a friend named Grant Ruby, and Grant Ruby's Twitter fingers are hot and busy. And so if he sees, so the thing that I've said is nobody's gonna harass women in front of me. And if somebody is harassing women online, then I will chirp at them immediately. And if you follow me on social media, I chirp a lot, I got a lot to say, okay? And so for me, that's that. In person, it depends. I would assert my privilege in situations. So oftentimes I'll walk up to somebody and say, you wouldn't say a word of that to me. Like, you talking wild at her, you wouldn't say that to me. Say it again. And what I oftentimes notice is if somebody's being awful to a woman and a man steps up, and by the way, this is not like dudes openings, I'm gonna go rescue women. No. Because half the time, they don't need rescuing from you. But if you see a situation, like whatever privileges you have, assert those privileges. And so it varies, right? So like, I'm just looking at my friend Kim here. Kim, how are you today? Okay. Kim's nickname in my house, we call her Kim, small but mighty. Kim has a set of skills and a set of privileges that I don't have. And so whatever privilege you have, assert that privilege to defend that person. Questions to the right.
How can we participate in creating policy that undoes what we're dealing with now?
I love it. I love that question. So in my government class, we talk about some fundamental truths that many Americans forget. The 10th Amendment to the Constitution says that all powers not guaranteed to the federal government belong to the states. Somewhere in Article 4, I want to say Section 1, Clause 4, the Constitution says that all states are self-ruling. The vast majority of policy that impacts your life day to day is in federal policy. I don't care who the president is, honestly. Like, the president isn't building my schools. The president isn't building my roads. The president is building my parks. And so we put a lot of energy, emotional energy, stress into like the tweet of the moment or the scandal of the moment, but we can't name city council members, and we can't name school board members. And there's an advantage there because can't nobody else either. And so what I would say is that like if there's an opportunity for you to get involved in local office, local politics, whether that's be running for office yourself or supporting somebody who's foolish enough, brave enough to run for office, right? Then you identify local candidates, you identify people who support the policy program that you have, and you advocate for that. Y'all, Congress is broken. Like, Congress ain't fixing to do about nothing. And Congress been broke since the 90s. One of the things that the deal is like the Hastert rule. This is dorky, but I teach government, so we're gonna go with it. Essentially, they will not introduce a bill on the floor of the House unless a majority of the majority supports it. Well, the current majority party's majority is not very large. And so what happens is a very radical wing within the majority has sway over what hits the floor. You aren't gonna get anything through Congress right now. Now, midterms are coming up, right? Pound that pavement. Cast those votes by mail, by the way. If you don't vote by mail, shame on you. But anyway, but like local politics, school boards, park districts, like that's the work. Kim, I love you.
Hi, Nate, I love you. Okay, I really struggle, as you all know, with Trump supporters, Republicans, conservatives, a lot. But I am hearing you and I'm acknowledging what you are saying about essentially reaching across the aisle. How do I do that?
Yep, here's the deal. Not everybody's worth reasoning with. And so you don't owe nobody, okay, you don't owe nobody your mental health, and you don't owe anybody like your energy. You have to identify and think about who are the people in my circle who are persuadable, who are the folks who I have relationships with, I can have meaningful conversations with, and then some folks you just gotta write off. Because the thing is, like, if I go back to that civil rights photo, that girl who's screaming, segregation now in that photo, she's probably still alive, right? There are some folks who were born awful, they're gonna die awful. And I don't think that you invest that much time in them. But if you have that uncle who just started watching a certain channel in the last couple of years, and they watch that channel all the time, and they start quoting that Hannity fellow, like, they haven't gone all the way down the crazy well yet, okay? Have that conversation. And I'll say this, Kim, also, it's not your job. Because it's not the job of Black America to convince non-Black folks who think we're awful that we are awful. Like, put differently, and again, it's getting quiet now, but I am mad. Put differently, Black folks have been trying to fix white racism for about 270 years. I think it's white folks' turn to try. And I'll add, I say that as somebody who, like, okay, they're coming for me. It's a necessity in my obligation professional life and also in my marriage to be fluent in like dominant white culture. Like, I say this is not like a white people are bad. No, some of the best people I know are white people. Does that sound awful when we say it too? It's awful, don't do that to us. Like, that's the work for y'all to do. Question way in the back.
So I love what you said about affirm, report, and confront. And I do this. I have lots of difficult conversations. A common pattern in my conversations with white people are they are good-minded, good-intentioned white people who want to step in. They're unsure of the opportunity window of when they should do so. Because, right, like as a woman of color, I've had my voice taken from me several times, although it may be very well-intentioned of a white person coming in to step in on my behalf. When do you think it's appropriate and not appropriate to do so? And whether or not they may want to be all eager to jump into the report and the confront, you know, where that to them looks like, I'm going to call law enforcement, I'm going to get this under control, and the person of color is like, no, please don't call law enforcement.
Sure.
So do you have maybe like a general rule of thumb, like when they should intercede without taking that person's voice away?
Yeah, so this is going to sound like a dodge, because it is. I'm not arrogant enough to know or think that I know the right answer for every situation. I would say it's relational. I would say this, like, we've all sat in situations, maybe arguing with a spouse, where like you walk away and you're like, oh man, I shoulda. Save those I shouldas for the next situation. I would say this, if somebody who you have a personal relationship with is being attacked, what I would do is go to that person and say, do you need help? Can I help you? And if that person goes, no, I got this, then leave them alone. But if you go to that person and you say, can I help you? And they're like, yes, get this fool away from me, let's go, right? And so I guess to answer your question, I kind of got to the answer is, you need to check with the person who's being attacked and say, sis, do you need help? And so I would say like online, simple DMs, like just, hey, I see this MAGA weirdo is harassing you with his 8 European flags and Hitler symbolism. Do you need any, can I clap back for you? If they're like, nah, I muted them, then let them be. But if they're like, yeah, swing at that fool. And sorry, that's verbal pugilism. I am not endorsing assault. I know Chaplinsky versus New Hampshire. Like, I know my cases, so just verbal pugilism. I think we have time for one more.
What's the best advice you can give to checking to make sure our children are getting more accurate historical representation of American history?
Show up in classrooms. That's it. Just show up in classrooms. I love when parents come in my classroom, because what happens is the whole room is like, whose mom is that? Whose dad is that? He know my mom. Kids are all way better behaved. Like, go in. No. You know I'm not lying. Like, grandma walks in, everybody else is like, ooh, he know my grandma. So anyway, go into classrooms, ask to visit. If the teacher's like, ooh, I'm not sure, then they whack, right? Like, a teacher, I'm proud of my work. Anybody in this room right now, I don't care how ugly you are welcome in room 306 at Lincoln High School anytime. You can walk in, sit down, and watch the lesson. If your child's in a classroom, that's not the norm, question it. If your teacher won't communicate what's happening, won't talk to you about text curriculum, won't talk to you about resources, talk about it. But like, have conversation with teachers. Y'all, when you talk to somebody, you know if they're whack or not. Like, I think I've communicated over the last 15 minutes, I'm not whack, right? Talk to your children, your nephews, your nieces' teachers. And this is important for me, and this is real for me, because like, I'm up here in Snohomish County right now. My brother in the 1990s moved to Marysville, and then moved to South Everett, and now he lives out in Maltby. My niece graduated from Monroe High School. My brother lives under those buzzy power lines by the golf course, if you know what I'm talking about. And I've gone up for holidays and spent many days at the Maltby P&P. Y'all, the work that needs to happen up here is work that's going to benefit my family and benefit your family, and it's work that has to happen. Because, again, I say to you, they have a plan. Thank you.